On July 27, 2020, somewhere in the leafy suburbs of Minnesota, a man woke up in the middle of the night to what can only be described as a Count Dracula moment. A bat was in his bedroom, screeching and biting into his hands. What's more, this furry-fanged thug was rabid, which might explain why it attacked an innocent man in his bed. As this show will reveal, this guy was now in for the experience of a lifetime. A viral nightmare of terrifying proportions that only a disease like rabies can provide. Rabies, folks, is no joke. Where pathogens are concerned, it's without a doubt the GOAT. From stray dogs transmitting this deadly disease to American organ transplant receivers and innocent churchgoers, rabies is everywhere, and it takes no prisoners. It is the worst, and you'll agree with us in about 20 minutes. We're going to come back to the fate of the man involved in that bedroom bat attack soon, but first we need to give you a Rabies 101 class to help you better understand what might happen if you one day get on the wrong side of a rabid animal. Follow our advice and we promise you'll be just fine. The good news is the chance of getting rabies is very slim for most people, but the bad news is if you do get it and you don't manage it properly, you're going to have the worst experience of your life before it finally takes your life. Rabies is a boss-level virus in terms of the case fatality rate. If rabies becomes symptomatic, you pretty much have a 100% chance of dying. Some sources say 99%, but as you'll see with our final rabies real-life story, it's more like 99.99%. In short, you're gonna die if you show signs of being infected. Even smallpox, which is one hell of a nasty pathogen, only had about a 3 in 10 chance of killing someone when it was still around the 20th century. Sure, it wiped out 300 million people from 1900 until it was eradicated in the 1970s, but in terms of its deadliness, it couldn't hold a candle to rabies. Even the scary Ebola and Marburg viruses only have on average about a 50% fatality rate. The good thing about rabies, and today we won't say many good things about rabies, is that if it's detected early on, right after contact with the diseased animal, it is highly survivable. That's good to know since you can find rabies in about 150 nations and territories in the world. More good news for most of Western Europe, Australia, and Japan is you won't find rabid dogs, and dogs are a big spreader of rabies. As for the USA, each year 60 to 70 dogs and at least 250 cats are reported to be rabid to the CDC. More good news for Westerners is that 95% of human rabies deaths happen in Asia and Africa. We don't have the exact number of rabies deaths each year, but we do know that back in 1990, when people in the US were dancing to MC Hammer's hit tune You Can't Touch This, 54,000 people in the world made the mistake of letting themselves be touched by a rabid animal's teeth. The CDC says these days the death toll from rabies is still in the tens of thousands, likely anywhere from 30,000 to 60,000 a year. It's hard to know the exact numbers as the WHO says it doesn't have the data for some countries. Many rabies deaths are unreported and sometimes blamed on something else. You might find the odd rabies death in the UK, but that's usually the result of someone going abroad, such as the 2018 case of a British man dying horribly after a cat bit him on his vacation in Morocco. We'll tell you about some similar vacation nightmares featuring Americans later. The UK actually had its first homemade rabies death in 100 years in 2002 when a bat bit a Scottish dude. The country that is king of rabies is India. In a recent report, the WHO estimated that between 18,000 and 20,000 rabies deaths occur in India every year, but said the number could be much higher. You'll also find a lot of rabies cases in China, as well as parts of Southeast Asia. The WHO says accurate data is hard to come by, but India is certainly the world leader. As for countries in Africa, again, the data isn't always complete, but in 2015 there were 5,600 reported rabies cases in the Democratic Republic of the Congo alone. A separate study we found on rabies in Africa detailed the countries of Algeria, Namibia, Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, Tunisia, Uganda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. The study was startling to say the least. The number of rabies cases in these nations was anywhere from just 62 to as high as 563, but the death rate was at the very lowest 32.8% and at the highest 94%. That 94% country was Namibia, which had 269 cases. That's a hell of a lot of deaths considering rabies is treatable. We won't get too bogged down in the data. You just need to know that rabies is a serious business in parts of Asia and Africa. The reason's twofold, but before we go into those reasons, we have a question for you that isn't rabies related. Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless if you have a clinical mental health issue, like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human who lives in this world who is going through a hard time, Therapy can give you tools to approach your life in a very different way. And that's why I am excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible. And this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. There's a link in my description. It's betterhelp.com/infographics. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp, so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. And because finding a therapist is a little like dating, if you don't really fit with that therapist, which is a common thing with therapy, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/infographics. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. But as we were saying about rabies in Asia and Africa, the reason it's still such serious business is twofold. 99% of human rabies cases on these continents are caused by someone coming into contact with a rabid dog. Much of the world doesn't have rabid dogs these days, or like the US, has very few of them because dogs are mainly pets and they get vaccinated. A country such as the US has a widespread vaccination program, but you don't see many street dogs there. Whereas if you go to a country like Sierra Leone, you might bump into one of the estimated 500,000 strays. Head to Thailand and stray dogs walk up and down the beach like they own the place. In India, stray dogs, a total of 60 million of them, are part of the furniture on the street. It'd be hard to vaccinate them all since they keep on multiplying. The second reason why so many people die of rabies on these continents is people might not have easy access to the rabies shot if they live in a very far-off rural area. It should also be said that in both Asia and Africa, 40% of rabies deaths are of children under 15. That's because kids are either not able to defend themselves against dogs, or like many kids do, they'll walk right up to a zombified-looking pooch in the street and give it a little boop on the nose. So the vast majority of rabies cases are from dogs in these continents, but also on the list of rabid animals that have bitten someone are cat, jackal, rat, monkey, donkey, horse, pig, rabbit, kudu, goat, cattle, eland, hyena, and the short-tempered, tough-as-old-boots honey badger. In the US, it's a totally different matter, as it is in most Western nations. Since the street dog population is small to non-existent, it's not dogs you have to worry about. Like the guy in the intro, it's wild animals that are the main cause of someone getting rabies. Many cases of rabies deaths reported annually in the US involve bats, but other contenders are cattle, wolves, mongoose, coyotes, raccoons, skunks, and foxes. Of the US deaths that have happened over the years, 7 out of 10 were from bats, and that was on home soil. Later, we'll show how traveling Americans have sometimes stroked the wrong animal. All warm-blooded mammals can get rabies, and as we said, it's the street dogs that are the main culprits in the continents of Asia and Africa. You can't get rabies from a fish, a bird, an insect, or a snake. It's also extremely uncommon in small mammals such as mice, squirrels, rats, or hamsters. Rabbits don't often get it either. Before any of you Americans watching this video reach for your gun and go bat hunting, you should know that you're probably safe. About 60,000 Americans each year get what's called a post-exposure prophylaxis, or PEP, aka the rabies shot. We'll also talk about this later, as there are a lot of myths going around about this supposedly horrendous shot, making it sound like medieval torture. Newsflash, it is not. Whether you're in Jaipur, Johannesburg, Jacksonville, or John O'Groats, you probably want to know how to avoid rabies. Firstly, for all you viewers who live where stray dogs are common, the first step to avoiding rabies is not stroking or slapping the local hood dogs when they look sick. But how do you know if an animal is sick with rabies? Good thing about mammals is they tend to show how they're feeling, unlike, say, a caterpillar or a cockroach. Rabid mammals tend to act and look strange. You might have heard that they become a bit bitey, which can be true, but it's not always the case. And sure, they might foam at the mouth or drool, but again, that's not always the case. Sometimes they'll become timid or move slower, which is a different type of rabies. Once they're acting very lethargic or becoming unusually angry, the symptoms are already showing. There's an incubation period with rabies, which in most cases is somewhere between 2 weeks to 4 months, but has been known to be as long as a year. It all depends on how close the bite is to the brain and the spinal cord. When the virus reaches the nervous tissue, things can start to get weird. It also depends on how severe the bite is and how much of the virus got through. We keep saying bite because bites usually spread rabies, although in rare cases something else might do it. Rabies is spread through the saliva, so the chances of saliva getting into an open scratch without a bite is very low, but it's not impossible. We suggest if you have an open wound or a scratch, don't let that crazy-looking street dog, or any other street dog for that matter, take a good old lick on it. As you'll soon see, the virus can also get up your nose or into your eyes. A rabid animal most likely to bite you or try to bite you has what's called furious rabies. This is when the animal is very excitable and aggressive and might even start eating stones or chewing on car tires. There's also dumb rabies. Dumb rabies is when the animal suffers from progressive paralysis. Its face will distort and swallowing will become hard. The animal might look like it's had a stroke, it'll become uncoordinated, and then it'll die. So rather than growling at you and getting mad at you, it might just cower away in a corner as its body slowly breaks down. If you see a dog in the street in this condition, stay away, or better still, report it. We found an article in an English language magazine in Thailand in which a doctor at the Veterinarian Bureau of Animal Hygiene in Chiang Mai said if you see a dog in the street that looks rabid, just cut off its head and bring it to us. Here at the Infographic Show, we say this is a tad excessive. Still, the doctor in Thailand knew what rabies looks like in humans, so you can understand why he was perhaps so hardcore. If you do get bitten by a stray dog or a wild animal, the first port of call is to wash the bite with soap and water right away. That might save you, but you should still see a doctor. It'll then be decided if you need a rabies vaccination. The faster you get to a professional, the better. Remember, when the symptoms show, you ain't ever gonna go back watching the Infographic Show videos again. While the virus is still in the incubation period, there is hope for you. Even so, if you want the utmost safety, you should get the shot within 24 hours, or at least 72 hours of you being bitten, just to be totally safe. The longer you wait, the higher the risk. Okay, now let's talk about the shot. In the past, it wasn't pleasant. Rabies medication normally consisted of around 21 shots with a fairly long needle into the stomach. That was decades ago. Nowadays, you get 4 vaccinations, maybe 5 for immunocompromised people, plus you'll be given some human rabies immunoglobulin. The shots will come at various intervals, days 0, 3, 7, and 14, and day 28 if required. They might hurt a little bit, just like any vaccine, but the side effects are pretty rare, and they're usually only a headache, nausea, or in very rare cases, fever, joint pain, and hives. Basically, there's no need to fear the shot. As we said, it would be ideal to get it as soon as possible, but some sources say it can be 100% effective if given within 10 days. The problem is most people who get bitten dress the wound themselves and then only turn up at the hospital when it's too late. Now comes the scarier part of the show. Rabies is not a whole lot of fun in terms of the gazillion things that can happen to a victim. The virus, usually passed through the saliva of an animal, will enter the body most often through a wound and then make its way to the central nervous system from the nerves, aka the peripheral nervous system. It then travels like a time bomb into the brain and causes encephalitis and in some cases an inflamed spinal cord. In both cases, you will soon cease to exist if you get that far. The strange thing is, while this process may, as we told you, take days or weeks, it's been known to take years. So some people might have walked around normally for years and then suddenly come down with the rabies, probably thinking, damn, I knew I should have gotten that bite seen to. We found an academic paper whose first line in the abstract was, "We report a case of rabies viral encephalitis in a 48-year-old male with an unusually long incubation period, historically suspected to be more than 20 years." This was in Goa, India. The man turned up at a hospital in a delirious state, adverse to light, water, and air. He died a few hours later. This poor guy was a dog lover. It's thought he came into contact with rabies around 25 years before he showed symptoms, when he took 2 mangled street dog corpses off the street and gave them a proper burial. While blood is not infectious, he was somehow exposed to the dog's infectious tissue. The CDC says infectious material can be tears, nervous tissue, saliva, and respiratory tract fluids. This was a very unusual case, although the paper also talked about a Vietnamese girl who went to live in Australia and died of rabies that she'd gotten in Vietnam 6.5 years earlier. We found more literature on rabies that told us the incubation period is up to 30 days in 30% of cases, 31 to 90 days in 54% of cases, more than 90 days in 15% of cases, and in only 1% of cases more than a year. Now let's talk about symptoms in humans. The first stages are just a general crappy feeling, like a cold or a flu. If you have a wound, it might burn, itch, tingle, or feel numb. Things soon get worse. Just like an animal, you might become very excitable, you might hallucinate. You might develop a fear of water, hydrophobia, a part of the delirium related to fear of swallowing. Just the thought of water can make the throat convulse in violent spasms. This might also cause you to have a fear of air and wind, aerophobia. A light breeze could cause painful spasms. You could become aggressive. This is why you might be tied down. It doesn't mean you're angry, you're just confused. Rabies affects parts of the brain responsible for controlling behavior. And yes, it's possible to froth at the mouth. Saliva production increases with rabies. Why? Because the virus wants to survive and prosper. With more saliva, it can more easily be passed on. After all that, you're likely to die of cardiorespiratory arrest. The first phase of symptoms, called the prodromal phase, can last 2 to 10 days, which then turns into the acute neurologic period, which also lasts 2 to 10 days. So this nightmare is often quite prolonged. You'll wish you were dead if indeed your brain is functioning enough to be able to make a wish. What we just described was you getting furious rabies. But you might also get the human version of dumb rabies, which might also be called paralytic rabies. Paralytic rabies is not as nightmarish. You just gradually become paralyzed like a Duracell bunny that's running down on its battery. An academic paper in Thailand described a man with this sort of rabies. It said he had a stiff neck, generalized muscle weakness, muscle power grade 4 in the upper limbs and grade 3 in the lower limbs, with hyporeflexia, decreased or absent reflex response, of both knee and ankle jerks, and loose anal sphincter tone. These symptoms gradually worsened and he died. Slowly but surely your whole body will go limp, and then you enter a coma and die. We think this sounds much more preferable to furious rabies, but as luck would have it, only 20% of humans get the dumb kind. Furious rabies also has a kind of positive effect on some people, although that's debatable if you enjoy it. With furious rabies in humans, there have been rare cases of hypersexual behavior in men. This has something to do with how rabies affects the limbic system of the brain. A paper in the National Institutes of Health said the victim showed increased sexual desire, involuntary erections, and in some reports, continuous orgasms occurring at the rate of 1 per hour. Talk about going out on your shield. Now let's have a look at some more individual cases that cover a wider spectrum of causes and symptoms. In 2009, a paper was published in the US that talked about a 48-year-old Vietnamese male construction worker who went to a hospital in Hanoi, Vietnam. At first, he felt pain and numbness in both forearms and a flushing sensation all over his body. He was sweating a lot and felt really horny. You should now know this guy has about a 0.1% chance of surviving. He soon started having muscle spasms when he saw water or felt a breeze. Tick-tock went the clock of life, but there was something pretty amazing about this guy's case. In the same paper, there was the case of a 37-year-old Vietnamese farmer who went to the hospital sweating like all hell. He was also scared of water and breezes and had regular muscle spasms, but at the time he was lucid and talking. The thing is, with these two guys, there were no puncture marks on the skin, and the men were lucid enough to tell doctors they had not been bitten by dogs or wild animals. Not ever, as far as they could tell. But get this, one patient had 2 months before he was admitted, butchered and consumed a dog. Canine karma had seemingly breached this man's mortal defenses. The paper added, the patient took the dog's carcass home, where he first extracted all the teeth with a knife. He mentioned that he did this as a preventative measure against rabies, as he was aware of the presence of rabid dogs in his neighborhood. The second guy butchered and killed a cat and ate the meat and organs in a dish known as ruoman. The guy admitted that before he killed the cat, it had been acting very weird, sitting in a dark corner meowing. Both guys got rabies from the dead animals. Somehow the infectious material got into them. Both of them became progressively worse and died. The paper said the point of entry of the rabies virus in these cases is unclear, but removal and preparation of the dog and cat's brains may have generated large amounts of infectious rabies virus. The paper then used some brainy words to say the virus got into their mouth, eyes, or nose. We guess the moral of the story is don't eat cats and dogs, and bats for that matter. There have also been similar cases of rabies from eating dogs in the Philippines and in China, according to that paper. We also had a look of reports of US cases. Most were from bats inside the US, but there were a bunch of cases that involved Americans traveling abroad and then showing rabies symptoms on their return home. The cases happened from 2003 to 2018. There were 43 in all, and 40 people died because they didn't receive the vaccine in time. The data included 2003, male, 64, bite, dog, mongoose, Puerto Rico. 2004, male, 41, bite, dog, Haiti. 2006, male, 2, bite, dog, Philippines. 2009, male, 42, bite, dog, India. 2010, male, 19, bite, dog, Mexico. 2011, male, 40, bite, dog, Brazil. 2014, male, 28, bite, dog, Guatemala. Some of you might have seen the pattern here. If you don't want rabies, keep as far away from dogs as possible. Although it seems that only men have gotten rabies, 9 women have also died from this almost incurable disease, but they were all bat bite deaths, bar one, who was a 65-year-old woman who died after being bitten by a street pooch in India. What's surprising is 4 of the people on the list got rabies after receiving an organ transplant. The donor had died of rabies, but that hadn't been in the autopsy. There have since been calls to check organ donors more thoroughly. In one separate case, a U.S. Air Force recruit died, but it seems it wasn't known rabies had killed him. He then donated his heart, kidneys, and liver to 3 separate people in the U.S., and they all got rabies. In this case, all 3 were treated with vaccines, but still, talk about having rotten luck. Now back to the start. What happened to that guy who woke up at night with a bat sucking on his hand? He went to the hospital and he had 3 rabies shots on time. Even so, according to the paper, he developed right-sided facial paroxysms of severe pain with excessive right eye lacrimation. He then got worse. He couldn't swallow, the weakness increased, and he died 15 days after the onset of symptoms. This shouldn't have happened, of course, since we told you the shots should do the business. A study on the matter said this was the first reported failure of rabies PEP using modern cell culture vaccine in the Western Hemisphere in a patient who received PEP promptly after a confirmed exposure. Just rotten luck, we guess. Anyway, he was 84, so his body might not have been able to cope. There was a second case that was similar. This time it was an 80-year-old guy in Illinois who in 2021 woke up in his bedroom, we kid you not, with a bat sucking on his neck. If that were us, we'd have run downstairs to get the crucifix and the garlic, but this old guy just shrugged it off. He even refused to get all the jabs. One of the reasons is he kept bats. He loved and trusted his bats. He might have also been rather stubborn. A month later, he had intense neck pain and a killer headache, and then his hands went numb. He also had trouble swallowing and speaking, and he died soon after. The Lake County Health Department executive director told the press, rabies infections in people are rare in the United States. However, once symptoms begin, rabies is almost always fatal. Now, for a happier tale. When someone goes to the hospital with rabies symptoms, doctors still try to save them, even though it's a bit like trying to win a fairground hoopla game. Both of the previously discussed cases from Vietnam might have had the symptoms, but they were both put in an induced coma and then pumped full of antiviral drugs and other drugs to try to quell the disease raging through them. This is in line with something called the Milwaukee Protocol. Does it work? Well, kind of. It worked for one person in the entire world in what some folks might have called a miracle. She is Gianna Geis, who was bitten by a bat in church in 2004 in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. The bat had been flying through the church, dive-bombing and annoying people. And in what is possibly one of the most ironic acts in human history, Gianna smacked the bat with her good old prayer book. The bat was soon down for the count, or so it seemed. When she picked it up by the wings, it started screeching, and just as she threw it outside into a bush, it took a bite out of her finger. This Christian bat abuser then went home and washed the wound, only in 3 weeks' time to realize her finger felt numb and was tingling. She just left it though. 2 days later, she wanted to throw up, and a day after that, she was seeing 2 of everything. That's when she went to the hospital. She wrote in a story, "By the time I got there, I was semi-delirious and vomiting. I was asked to stand on one leg, but I couldn't keep my balance." When she told them about that assaulting an innocent little bat with her hefty prayer book, the doctor said, "Oh my God." Then they told her parents she probably only had hours to live. This was a bit of an exaggeration. The doctor should watch more infographic show videos. One doctor told her that he was gonna wing it, put her in a coma, and fill her veins with antiviral drugs. He gave her regular shots of ketamine too, a dissociative anesthetic medicine that in high doses can actually make a person look like they have dumb rabies. A week later, Gianna came out of her K-hole and was informed she might just be the first person in the world to survive rabies after the onset of symptoms. What the amazing Dr. Rodney Willoughby did that day became known as the Milwaukee Protocol. It is the only treatment that's ever worked to save someone's life when they've already become symptomatic. It took many weeks for Gianna to recover, and she still had speech issues, but she gradually improved. Even so, a decade later, she still had some speech and balance problems. She was still able to tell stories about her experience, one of which stated, "I don't have a problem with bats." Amen to that. Now you need to watch a video about how something like rabies could end the world, the end of civilization century by century, or have a look at viruses that were actually lab leaks.